Now, some of you may have heard the story about Forrest Gump making it to the pearly gates. Forrest arrives and St. Peter greets him warmly. "Good to see you, Forrest." "Good to see you, sir," says Forrest. "Well, I need to let you know, Forrest, that we do now have a brief entrance exam for heaven." Forrest looked a little concerned, but St. Peter said, "Don't worry, it's not a hard test. It just has 3 questions. Here's the first one. Are you ready? Number 1, tell me the days of the week that begin with the letter T." Well, Forrest thought for a moment. He kind of scrunched his face and he said, "Oh, I know that. The 2 days of the week that begin with the letter T are today and tomorrow." Well, St. Peter kind of hesitated and said, "Well, I guess I got to give you that one." Well, here's the second question, a little bit harder, a math question. How many seconds are in a year? And Forrest said, "Oh, that one's really easy. It's 12. And St. Peter says, "Well, how on earth did you come up with 12 seconds in an entire year?" And Forrest said, "Well, there's January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd. St. Peter said, "Well, I guess I've got to give that one to you as well." He said, "Well, here's the last question, and I'm sure you do know this one. What is the name of God?" And Forrest said, "Of course I know that one. It's Andy." And St. Peter says, "Andy? How on earth did you come up with Andy?" And Forrest says, "Well, it's in the song. Andy walks with me, and he talks with me." Well, Forrest opens, the pearly gates are opened, and St. Peter says, "Run, Forrest, run." Thank you. There's one you can share over coffee tomorrow. Now, many of us grew up on that hymn, in the Garden, Cokesbury hymnal. And even though it probably is not on my top 10 list of favorite hymns, it has been running through my head for the last several weeks since the stewardship team decided to utilize a gardening and growing theme for this season when we're trying to highlight our call to be faithful stewards. Hence, a couple of weeks ago, the apple core, and out in the narthex is our dream tree. But when you think about it, the scriptures are filled to overflowing with images of gardens and growth. The Bible begins in a garden. The story of the world begins in a garden, the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2. And the world is healed, and the world is fulfilled in a garden as described in the book of Revelation, chapter 22. And in between, we find out that Israel is an unruly vineyard, and Jesus' stories overflow with fig trees and olive gardens, wheat and tares, mustard seeds. And once a sower went out to sow. Now, I personally really do enjoy digging in the dirt, but I have to confess to you that I am pretty much a dementia gardener. Yes, you heard that right, a dementia gardener. I plant things and then I forget where I put them. So every spring, it's a surprise all over again. Oh, that's where you are. And I get to enjoy it all over again. So I may not be the best gardener on the planet, but I have learned one very important thing about gardening. And that is, there is no garden without a gardener. Gardens do not just happen, and therefore harvests do not just happen. It's very much like the mother who was taking clothes into the rooms upstairs, and she passed her young son's bedroom, and there he was in the floor by his bed, down on his knees. His hands were folded, his eyes were looking imploringly toward heaven, and he was repeating over and over again, "Tokyo, Tokyo, Tokyo." Well, this got the mother's wondering what was going on, so she went in and said, What's going on? And he said, "Oh, Mom, in school today we had that really big geography test, and I really hope Tokyo is the capital of France." Well, we all know that hoping it's so doesn't necessarily make it so. That's not the way prayer works, and that's not the way gardens work either. And this is where I began to think about this church, Christ United Methodist Church. If we are God's garden, and if we hope to produce a harvest that truly is a God-pleasing harvest, how do we do that? And reflecting on that question, I was led to think about the ancient church at Thessalonica, a place that Paul brought to memory with joyful thanksgiving for their fruitful harvest. Listen to Paul's words about this church. He knew the people there very well. His words to them are very warm and personal. And he begins with a greeting that has shaped the church community for generations. Grace to you and peace. Then he continues, "I give thanks to God for all of you, remembering in my prayers your work of faith, your labor of love, your steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ." Now, one thing I want you to note here is the word work. I give thanks to God for your work of faith. Not gift of faith, it is a work of faith. Now, faith always begins as a gift. But faith becomes worthy of gratitude when the gift is transformed into action, when our faith nudges us to risk who we are and what we have on behalf of others, when the seed indeed is planted and watered and nurtured and weeded and cared for until at long last it produces fruit. That is the work of faith. Now, 30 years ago, there may not have been a whole lot of people who really thought Williamson County needed another United Methodist church. After all, there is First Church, and there is Bethlehem, and there is the Methadome. But there were a few who saw the possibility of a new community of faith, the opening of a new door in new ways to new people. And Christ United Methodist Church was literally born in a strawberry patch, a beautiful seed of promise. And how many of you here today are those who labored over that tiny seed? meeting in a tent with hay bale pews, meeting at the Baptist Children's Home, eating other people's cake. You have to ask some of the old folks about that one. You all are the ones who did all the setting up, the taking down. You were the child care givers, the youth leaders, the cooks, the custodians, and the curators of the faith. This church is here because of your work of faith, your labor of love, your steadfastness in hope. What a beautiful garden. And as a relative newcomer to this congregation, the thing that amazes me is the fruit. You see the fruit everywhere. An amazing relationship with inmates at Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, Room in the Inn, My Friend's House, Nicaragua Mission, Raise the Roof, Building Lives, Project Transformation, Healing House, partnerships with Johnson Elementary School, Christ Closet, Creation Care, One Gen Away, Habitat Bills. Oh my goodness, the fruit. And as I list every single ministry, I'm sure that some of you, as I lift up those words, can see in your mind's eye the faces of the saints, those who poured out their hearts and their resources, those who put their hand to the plow and to the hoe, who weeded and watered and nurtured, so that Christ's garden might grow and bring forth a beautiful harvest. What a wonderful picture. I give thanks to God for every remembrance of you. But we are not just shaped by the past. We are also shaped by the future. So what about tomorrow's garden? If you just plant once, at some point people are going to go hungry. You don't just plant one garden and then say, Tokyo, Tokyo, Tokyo. Every year the soil needs to be turned, the seed needs to be planted, the garden needs gardeners. And isn't that us, you and me, saying yes to God's vision, yes to God's mission, yes to God's promise? And doesn't God's vision find a place to sprout in our work of faith? Doesn't God's mission find a place to grow in our labor of love? And doesn't God's promise find a place to blossom in our steadfast hope? One of the images of All Saints' Day that is a treasure in my heart is described in Hebrews 12. And it says that we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And I can imagine them, the faithful saints who have gone before us, cheering us on to step out further, to dream of greater things for God, encouraging us when the way is hard and challenging us when the way has become too comfortable. What will our new garden look like? What shall we grow? Will the garden we plant be sufficient, or will it be amazing? Shall we expand the boundaries? Where are the new workers going to come from? Maybe we need to hear a challenge from Cecil Benton. Be daring, be different, be impractical, be anything that will assert integrity of purpose and imaginative vision against the play-it-safers, the creatures of the commonplace, the slaves of the ordinary. So the question we are left with today is, how is God challenging you? Again, as I think about All Saints' Day, and I call to memory those who have gone before us, to whom we have entrusted to God's good care in our resurrection faith. And as we think of ourselves as gardeners of the gospel that is still unfolding and growing and becoming, this one thing I truly know. It really does take a whole lot of faith to take something that is dried up, browned, and shriveled, and to put it in the dirt where it is dark and dank, and believe with all of your heart that if we water it, nurture it, care for it in due season, it will grow and bring forth a marvelous harvest. What shall we plant for God?